Hi guys, back again with my channel. In this video, I will recap one of the unique film titled Little Shop of Horrors. Spoiler ahead. Watch out if you not watch it yet. At the beginning of the film, we are shown a flower shop employee named Seymour. Seymour is not alone, he has a colleague named Audrey. But the difference is, Audrey is well cared for by Mr. Mushnik, the shop owner. Meanwhile, Seymour always scolded because of his carelessness at work. Moreover, Mr. Mushnik is also quite emotional, because his flower shop has not been visited by customers in months. The business was too slow that the three of them couldn't think of anything else to do. Like it or not, Mr. Mushnik decided to close his shop from tomorrow morning until an unknown time. In the end, Audrey gave Mr. Mushnik an idea about a strange and unique plant that Seymour found in the shop's backyard. However, Mr. Mushnik is not sure that his shop will become crowded by relying on the strange plant he has found. In fact, Seymour himself is not sure how attractive this plant will be if it is seen by visitors. But amazingly, after only a few seconds, there was already one visitor who was interested in the plant. As a result, Mr. Mushnik is very confused and happy, because so many visitors suddenly come to his shop. Consequently, Audrey, Seymour and also Mr. Mushnik decided not to sell the strange plant. Instead, he uses it as an attraction so that all visitors buy other plants. Then, Mr. Mushnik, who was proud of the idea of his two employees, immediately invited the two of them to dinner tonight. However, Audrey had to refuse the invitation, because she had promised her boyfriend for the weekend away. On the other hand, Mr. Mushnik said that Audrey has been a victim of violence so far. Sadly, dinner was cancelled, and Mr. Mushnik asked Seymour to look after the plant as an extra task. When you think about it, there really isn't much entertainment for Seymour other than the strange plant he's found. But that wasn't the case. Seymour had absolutely no idea why this plant had wilted in a while. Even though he was very consistent in fertilizing, watering, and also drying the plant during the day. Until one day, Seymour's hand was pricked by a thorn from another plant, and bleeding through his index finger. This is where Seymour notices that something is wrong with the plant, which is where the plant moves suddenly while telling Seymour to feed something. None other than, the only food that was requested was the blood on Seymour's finger. Surprisingly, the plant was able to detect which finger was bleeding and which was not. Seymour had no other choice, and he was forced to feed the plant with drops of his blood. You can see for yourself. After being fed, the plant genuinely swallowed fresh blood from Seymour's finger. The incredible part is that just a few drops made the plant's size grow a few inches. Long story short, because its size continues to grow day by day, Seymour was invited by the local radio to explain the phenomenon. However, the only thing that no one else knew until now was that the plant was always sucking Seymour's blood. Every hour, every time, Seymour always feeds him with his own blood, even though he has no idea how long he'll have to do it. Moreover, the growth of the plant is very fast, until it reaches the height of a teenager. Of course, this attraction makes local residents enthusiastic to come to this shop and make Mr. Mushnik dizzy to serve them. What's surprising is that Mr. Mushnik doesn't seem to care about Seymour at all. While the sacrifices that have been given by Seymour are very big. As a result, Audrey, who became Seymour's only confidant, immediately planned to take him for a walk that night. Then, we are transferred to Audrey's boyfriend who works as a dentist. However, this guy named Oren has a hard habit, which makes his patients traumatized to come again. Later in the evening, while Simon was excited to go with Audrey, Oren appeared out of nowhere and approached Seymour's house. And it turns out that Seymour has been living in Mr. Mushnik's flower shop all this time, because he has no family at all in the city. From this moment, Seymour could see directly how Oren treated Audrey. In other words, this proves Mr. Mushnik's claim that Audrey has always been a victim of her boyfriend's aggression. Yes, back to daily activities, there is no entertainment for Seymour, other than spending time with his strange plant. However, just as Seymour wanted to get ready for a break, the plant suddenly wilted again. However, how surprised Seymour was after hearing the plant was able to speak. And of course the plant actually told Seymour to feed it at that time. The problem is, no matter how Seymour continues to refuse and avoid, the plant still forces Seymour to find it a food. At that moment, Seymour didn't really know what to do. Then, by coincidence, Seymour saw Oren who was punishing Audrey to go home by walking. Obviously, Seymour, who saw this, could no longer hold his emotions, and he immediately set up a plan to carry out an assassination. The next night, Seymour also deliberately came to Oren's workplace and pretended to be a patient. But before that, he had to wait for one patient who was being treated by Oren himself. After minutes of waiting, it was now his turn to pretend as best he could. Before dealing with Seymour, Oren used the gas mask he had just bought while traveling with Audrey. I don't know what the purpose was, but what was clear was that Seymour immediately took advantage of that condition to shoot Oren. The problem is, Seymour doesn't dare to kill people at all, and the mask actually kills the Oren on its own. As a result, the body of Oren, who had died, was immediately dragged by Seymour as far as he could until he arrived at the flower shop. Immediately, Oren's body was dragged back into the backyard to be cut into pieces by Seymour himself. On the other hand, Mr. Mushnik, who looks like he's been away, is walking towards his house to return home. Plus, his house was next to the shop, allowing him to hear Seymour's axe swinging. As a result of his intense curiosity, Mr. Mushnik went to find out, and he saw Seymour dismembering someone's body. Then, once Seymour had finished his work, he immediately fed the plant, which was very voraciously eating Oren's body. I really can't imagine if the plants in front of the house can change like that. As the day passed, Seymour, who was worried about his actions, saw Audrey, who was being approached by two policemen. As it turned out, the two policemen questioned Audrey about the disappearance of Oren, who was not working today. Hearing this, Seymour immediately invited Audrey to have a long conversation. But surprisingly, after that, Audrey even admitted that she herself couldn't stand Oren's presence anymore. In a moment like this, Seymour confessed his feelings to Audrey, while comforting her with all sorts of seduction. Then, Seymour, who had finished entertaining Audrey, immediately returned to the shop to rest. However, he was surprised by the presence of Mr. Mushnik, who was already in the basement. Worse yet, Mr. Mushnik threatened Seymour to take responsibility for his actions. In which, Mr. Mushnik became a witness that night, and at that time Seymour was immediately ordered to admit to the police. However, Mr. Mushnik immediately changed his mind and offered Seymour another solution. On the condition that he would allow Seymour to get out of town for a few months. Meanwhile, Mr. Mushnik will look after the plant himself. But in fact, Mr. Mushnik was not welcomed by the plant at all. Instead, he was turned into a soft meal, which the plant ate in his own shop. A few days after the incident, instead of being a fugitive, Seymour was visited by many of TV companies. The companies then asked for Seymour's autograph to conduct interviews. Moreover, the size of the plant was so large that it touched the ceiling of the shop. However, when the interview was about to start, the plant suddenly wilted again and made all the parties wondering. Then, at that very moment, Seymour threw them all away, claiming that he was going to give the plants medicine. Actually, Seymour was just confused how to feed the plants in such crowded conditions. It was at this stage that Seymour, who had been confused, immediately had an idea when he saw his girlfriend. In which case, he planned to use the money from the TV company as well as the magazine to get out of this city. Plus, without the presence of this plant, their lives will undoubtedly be more peaceful. In the evening, Seymour would secretly run away, leaving that wilting plant without food. But again, Seymour was again forced to look for food, which he finally agreed to. But because he was in a hurry, Seymour planned to buy processed animal meat. At the same time, Audrey saw the plant moving while looking at her. Until it made Audrey curious, at which point she went straight to the flower shop. When she entered, Audrey was surprised to hear that the plant was able to speak to her. But unfortunately, the shock didn't last long, because Audrey was immediately pulled and swallowed alive at that moment. Seymour, who had arrived, immediately realized that his girlfriend's life was in danger. Immediately, he tried to rescue Audrey, who had been swallowed half her body. Yeah, despite the fact that Audrey was successfully rescued, but in the end she had to die because of the poison that was in the mouth of the plant. As a result, Seymour became very emotional because the only woman he loved had to die in front of his eyes. From there, Seymour, with a heavy heart, immediately made Audrey the last food for the plant. After he finished feeding the plant, Seymour didn't know what to do anymore, but instead he ran to the roof of the building and decided to commit suicide. However, he was again surprised by the presence of journalists who were already in the building. Apparently, the reporter admitted that he had taken some parts of the plant at the time of the interview. Which, the results of his actions were not in vain, and he managed to grow a similar plant in his house. Surprisingly, journalists who were already tempted by the dollar, decided to produce the plant in large quantities. And of course, he will sell these plants to all people who are tempted to have them. The disaster for humanity would soon occur as a result of this idea. And unfortunately again, the mother of the plant even grew bigger at that time. In fact, instead of getting better, the mother plant actually puts out quite a lot of offspring. In the end, Seymour as a keeper for the plant was immediately eaten alive. Long story short, over the time, these plants have been mass-produced and sold to the public. Even though they all had no idea how dangerous the plant was to their lives. Thus, after a few days, the plague of giant plants had begun, which caused life in the city to begin to crumble in an instant. I can't imagine what it would be like, if such a large man-eating plant had taken over the city in large numbers. No matter the place, the situation, the time and also the circumstances, all the giant plants had threatened human life, and the film ended. Yes, in essence, this film reminds me of a plant species called Venus flytrap. But the difference is, this plant does not eat humans, but eats insects. Okay guys, that's all the recap from the Little Shop of Horrors movie. See you again in the next video.